Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Catherine from SEB Housing, and this is the information session for the affordable lottery and apartments at Newton Crossing in Newton, Massachusetts. There's going to be 73 affordable rental units available in this lottery. So I'm going to go over the application, the eligibility and lottery processes, and then what to expect after the lottery is run. So if you have any questions during the session, you're encouraged to either type them into the Zoom chat, or you can unmute yourself. When you came into the meeting, you were muted just to minimize any outside noise, but feel free to take that mute off. If you have a question, I'll be asking periodically throughout the presentation as well. This is a live session. It's being recorded for anyone who wants to view it after the fact. It'll be posted to SEB Housing's YouTube channel. And then if anyone's watching this right now after the recording, if you want to get in touch with SEB Housing, you can email us at info@sebhousing.com with any questions, or you can give us a call at the 617 number on your screen. So just for some background information on who we are, so SEB Housing, we are an off-site affordable housing consulting group. I see the question here, what does it stand for? So SEB stands for Stockard, Engler, and Brigham. Those were three people who founded the company a while back, and the name has stayed the same ever since, even though two of the people are no longer involved. So we're an off-site consulting group. We have been hired by the developer to market the affordable units, and we're the ones obviously conducting the information session. We're going to be collecting and reviewing applications to determine households' eligibility for the affordable housing program, and we will be the ones running the lottery when the time comes. So in the initial phases of this process, we are your main point of contact rather than the management team over at Newton Crossing, but then further along in the process, the on-site management team contact information will be made available to you after the lottery. And if you're one of the top households on the waiting list, you'll be able to get in touch with them to do your lease screening, which I'll talk more about in a little while. So the first step in the process, like I said, is to apply for the lottery and be found eligible for the affordable housing program based off of what you listed on your lottery application. So when you're submitting your application for this lottery, you are self-reporting what your income is. You are not, at this point, you don't need to send in verification of your income, pay stubs, anything like that, tax returns, but later on in the process, you would need to do that after the lottery if you're one of the top households on the waiting list, which I'll talk about in a few. The second step in the process, like I said, if your position is high enough on the waiting list, you'll then be put in contact with the leasing office at Newton Crossing, and you'll do their lease eligibility screening. So their lease eligibility screening might be similar to screenings that you may have done in the past if you have rented, and that could include a rental history check, reference check, credit history check, background check, that sort of thing. If you're found to be lease eligible for the community, you will then reserve one of the affordable apartments and be referred back to SEB Housing to complete your program certification. And your program certification is when you would be asked to submit pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, that sort of thing, to confirm what you had reported on your lottery application. So to get into the lottery, there's this online option for you. That's the quickest way to apply. So we encourage everyone to apply online if that is something that you're able to do. When you submit your online application, you'll get an instantaneous email back saying that your application was received. But then within a week or two, you'll get a more personalized email from someone at SEB Housing that has reviewed the application, and they will give you your lottery application number if you're eligible. So that initial email that you get is just sort of a prompted email that is responding to you having submitted something, but you'll hear from us with a more personalized email, like I said, in about a week or two once your application has been fully reviewed. If you haven't already, we encourage you to go to our website. So sebhousing.com has a page specific to Newton Crossing, And if you click on the housing opportunities page and then select I want to rent, and then you'll select Newton Crossing from there, you'll see the link to the lottery application, and you'll also see the a PDF to the information packet, which is where a lot of the information that I'm talking about tonight can be found. But in terms of the application, if for any reason the online application is not an option for you, you can complete the PDF application or paper application. You can request a paper application from us, and we'll mail it out to you. And you can submit it back to us in one of several ways. So you could scan it to us, send it in an email to info@scbhousing.com. You could, if you're in the Needham area, we have an office. You can drop off in our secure Dropbox over at the Needham office. You can send it by regular mail. So any of these ways, pick what is best for you, and complete that online application if you can. We encourage you to get your application in early. It's fairly brief. Like I said, you don't have to submit verifying information at this early stage. So no pay stubs or anything. You're just self-reporting your income. And applications are due on August 11th at 2 p.m. So in all our paperwork, it says August 11th at 2 p.m. The reason it has that specific time is because the online application link will no longer work after 2 p.m. So it will go offline after 2. And so you want to make sure you submit your application before then. You don't need to be a resident of Newton to apply for this lottery. However, there are going to be some affordable units that are going to have local preference for residents of Newton or applicants who work full-time in the city or have children attending Newton Public Schools. That shouldn't dissuade anybody who doesn't live in Newton now, because first of all, it's not all units that are affected by that local preference, but it's also everyone will have a position on the local preference list. It's just households who have local preference will have a higher position on the waiting list. So again, do not let it dissuade you if you're not a resident of Newton now. There's a question here. Is this the same as the West Newton Armory development? No, I'm not familiar with that development. And then question here, are these affordable or tax credit units? These have nothing to do with the tax credit program. They're just affordable units that are under the, I believe, LAU or LIP program for Massachusetts. So the rents are set not in accordance with your income or anything. These are set rents that are on your screen now. It's expected that the first leases will be available soon. So soon after the lottery, there won't be, much of a delay between all of the required screenings and a lease up. And the affordable rents, like I mentioned, are not set in accordance with an applicant's financial circumstances. So the amounts that you see on your screen, those are the current rents, and they've been set based off of a formula that the Affordable Housing Program dictates. And the formula, in part, takes the Federal Housing and Urban Development, so HUD, Area Median Income, or AMI for the Newton and Boston area, and that changes once per year. It just changed on May 1st. There was a new AMI released. The rent may increase once per year, but it can't increase within the first year of your lease or in the middle of any lease term. So if you were to sign a lease, for example, for September 1st, your lease would have the same rent until September 1st of 2027 at the very least. Any changes to the rent would be, the tenant would be notified months in advance. There would always be an advance written notice and all of that. In terms of the units themselves, so you can see here, there's 63 rental apartments at 80% of AMI, so that's 80% of the area median income. So those are higher rents. There's 4 studios, 37 one-bedrooms, 16 two-bedrooms, and 6 three-bedrooms. And you can see the various rents there, from the studios at $2,248 of the monthly rent, and then 3 bedrooms at $2,959. And then there's 10 apartments at the lower 50% of AMI. So that's households that have lower incomes would be qualifying for these 10 apartments. and we'll go through the amounts in just a minute. There are, for the 50% units, there is 1 studio, 4 1-bedrooms, 2 2-bedrooms, and 1 3-bedroom. And the rents go from the studio at $1,348 for the monthly rent, and the 3-bedroom 50% unit has a rent of $1,674. So a lot of this information is in the information packet, but in terms of the community description, so there's a fitness center, game room, golf simulator, there's an outdoor courtyard with some grilling stations and some areas for dogs. There is a free parking space included in the rent for each unit. Utilities are not included, so tenants need to pay electric heat, cooking, hot water, electricity, and a individually billed water sewer. And then, of course, being in Newton, it is close to the Mass Pike and the West Newton commuter rail station and the various shops and restaurants in town, or in the city, I should say. There's a question here, will there be preference for seniors? No, unfortunately, really one of the only preferences that the program allows is for that local preference that I mentioned, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. There are some lotteries that we've had that have, are only available to, or only open to 55 plus households, but this is not one of them. Question here, on the application, the household must make $40,400 to lease a 50% studio or $44,700 to lease a 50% 1-bedroom. What if your income is lower than those amounts? So if you go, I'm going to show you this in just a minute here. These are the minimum amounts, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes. If you make below these amounts, if you're close to that amount, it's possible that the management team over at Newton Crossing could still approve your application if you have, liquid assets or a lot of money in the bank that you'd be able to draw from to afford the rent. Because the affordable housing program itself doesn't have a minimum qualifying income, but almost all management teams do in terms of finding a household fit to be able to pay the rent. And that goes for whether or not a household is renting a market rate unit or renting an affordable unit. So again, these amounts, if you're close to them, but you're a little bit below, I would say still apply, because you may qualify based off of whatever criteria the leasing office is looking at when qualifying households. Okay, there's another question here. If you're a 1-person household, are only 1-bedrooms available to you, no 2-bedrooms? So for this lottery, you can apply to any unit size that you would like to. So you're not limited to just a studio or a 1-bedroom. You can apply for a 2-bedroom, but you're going to have lower priority on the waiting list, because the larger households are going to have priority on a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom waiting list. But this lottery doesn't have the restriction where you're not able to apply for larger units. Is the parking covered? I don't know if I have that readily available, but if you could send an email to info@scbhousing.com, we'll be able to reply with that information. Nope. So a question here, can someone else, like a parent, guarantee to make up the difference for a young adult who's below the income limits? No, unfortunately, there aren't co-signers, is what that might be called, are not permitted on the program. So we're only looking at the total household income for members of the household who are going to be living in the affordable apartment. So unfortunately, that answer is no. All right, in terms of the eligibility, we already kind of talked a little bit about the income amounts, but in order to qualify for the affordable housing program, there's 4 basic eligibility requirements in terms of this applying for this program or qualifying for this program. The first is that your household needs to be in the income parameters that are on your screen. So there's 2 income tiers for these units. There's 50% AMI units, which is a lower income, lower qualifying income, and lower rent units, and then 80% of area median income units. So this property is offering apartments at both of those income levels. So the amounts that are on your screen, I'll go through in just a minute, but just keep that in mind as the first eligibility criteria. The second item to keep in mind for eligibility purposes is that household priority is going to be given based off of household composition. So I kind of touched on this a minute ago too, but for example, if you're a one-person household or a couple that shares a bedroom, you're generally considered to be a type 1 household. So you can apply for a 2-bedroom unit, but larger type 2 and type 3 households are going to be placed ahead of you on the 2-bedroom waiting list since they have priority for those units. Some examples of type 2 or type 3 households would be all households who have 3 or 4 people, as well as some 2-person households. And on your application and in the information packet, there's a lot more information on household types and kind of where your household might qualify in terms of those types. The third eligibility criteria doesn't come up all that often, but you can't own a home at the time of program certification. So if you own a home now, you would need to sell it prior to completing the program certifications, which is kind of one of those last steps before you sign a lease. So that would need to take place before you lease an apartment. So if you own a home now, like I said, you need to be off the deed before leasing one of these units. And then also, it doesn't come up a whole lot, but applicants can't have financial interest or be a related party. What the program means by that is if you work for the developer or you work for the management company, you may not be eligible for this housing opportunity. And then just to circle back on the first eligibility criteria to explain more, so your income and assets, since these are affordable units, they're being made available to rent at prices that are lower than identical or very similar units at Newton Crossing. And income for this program is counted as a projection of your income over the next 12 months for all household members. So that includes, wages, Social Security. Really the only household members who have an exclusion are if you have a child in your household, so someone under the age of 18 who's earning a wage, we're not going to count their household income towards your total household income. And then also if you have dependent full-time students, so maybe you have a 20-year-old college student who's still a dependent of yours, if they're working and earning a wage, we would only count the first $480 of their wages when we're determining your total household income. Everybody else's income counts. No matter what type of income it is, you want to make sure that you list all of that on your application. And again, I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but the program requires that it's the gross income that we count when we're determining your eligibility. So not the net income, but the amount you make before taxes, although most of us are not taking home the full gross amount that's on our pay stubs. That is how the program requires that we calculate total household income. And then how we calculate it isn't one size fits all either, because everyone's wage or income circumstances are unique. So some applicants are going to have that weekly or biweekly salary that is very consistent throughout the year. But then there's going to be applicants who are self-employed or they work seasonally or per diem. And in those circumstances, when income is a little more spotty or just varied, we're going to need to look further into the past in order to project your anticipated income over the next 12 months. So that might mean, we need to ask for additional pay stubs or just additional information from you. If you're self-employed, you also need to complete a profit and loss statement. And we have a sample for you if you need that. And if you're self-employed, your business expenses will be taken into account as well. But in general, any income that you have been making, so if we're looking at your tax returns and you had 2 jobs last year, but you're only reporting 1 now, we're going to be asking about that and needing some information confirming that you're no longer at that previous employer. And so when you're filling out your application, like I said, just make sure everything is listed. So wages, Social Security, unemployment, pension amounts, whatever it is. And I mentioned that there's no minimum income for the affordable housing program. However, most management teams, like the management team at Newton Crossing, want to be sure that all tenants can afford the rent, regardless of whether or not they're applying for a market rate unit or a affordable unit. So that's why they have set a minimum household income equivalent to 2.5 times the monthly rent. That's what the approximate minimum income amounts that you see on your screen are. 2.5 times the monthly affordable rent. So households with mobile housing vouchers like Section 8 or MRVP, you can disregard those minimum income amounts because they're not going to apply to your household since you do have a voucher that you plan to use at the property, and the agency that administers your voucher is going to be paying a portion of your rent. So you don't have to meet that minimum income amount, but if you don't have a mobile housing voucher, you are going to need to meet that minimum amount or somewhere close to it. Like I said, the management team will have the final say. They'll eventually be confirming whether or not you are qualified to rent at the property in terms of the minimum income amount. So like I said, if you have liquid assets or if you have money in the bank that you'd be able to draw from to pay the rent, they may be able to lower that minimum income for you. But in general, to apply for or to be found eligible for this lottery, you're going to have a minimum, total household income for the year, total annual household income between these minimum amounts and the maximum amount. The maximum income limits are set in stone. There's no wiggle room there. So if you are a one-person household, you're looking to apply for a one-bedroom apartment or any apartment, you can't have a total household income over $96,000 because that is the 80% income limit for this area. There is no asset limit for rental opportunities. So you could have a significant amount of assets in the bank. You might be retired, looking to downsize. That's fine. We are still going to need to collect information related to assets, although there is no asset limit. And that's because any income that is being earned from assets that are accruing interest may need to be counted towards the total household income. So when I talk about assets, it's not just checking and savings accounts, but the net cash value of any 401ks, Venmo or PayPal accounts, even stuff like that. We don't need documents related to jewelry, art, or cars, though, so no personal asset information, but we will be looking for bank related information. Just a couple other questions here. Is there a cap on the rent increases? So the program doesn't cap the annual rent increases that the property could institute, but sometimes the city puts a cap, if the rents went way up because of the calculations for any given year, the city could say, we're capping the amounts at 3% or 5% increase. Like I said, the program doesn't have a maximum or a cap on rent increases, but it's unlikely that, if your rent was going to go up quite substantially, most management companies are going to want to keep you as a tenant. So they're not going to take the full allowable rent increase if they're not required to do that. So they might elect not to. Is the minimum income relevant the first year, but not in subsequent years? Yes, the minimum income is only for the lottery. That's a good question. That's actually never been asked before that I can think of. But yes, it's only for that is only for the lottery, I believe. I am going to triple check on that for you, but we certainly are not looking for a minimum income annually when we do recertifications for clients, meaning if we were to be doing the recertifications for this leasing office in the future. So I believe that answer is no. Do you have to apply for only one apartment size? Nope, you can apply for any apartment size that you think you might be interested in. And actually, one of the things I'm going to say in a few minutes too is we encourage you to apply for any unit size that you think you may be interested in, because if you, for example, thought, I'm going to apply for a one bedroom, I'm not really sure if I want to rent a studio. If you decide later that you would have accepted a studio, you're going to be at the bottom of the waiting list if you didn't apply for that studio during this lottery. So if you think you're interested in both a studio and a one bedroom, definitely apply for both. You can always not accept a studio if you come up first on that waiting list. So definitely, yes, apply for more than one unit size if you are interested in doing so. Another question here, if you're not selected during the lottery, does the name of those not selected remain on the waiting list? If so, for how long until you go through the list? Yes. So it stays on, your name will stay on the waiting list, and annually the leasing office will reach out to the rest of the waiting list who maybe wasn't contacted when they were looking to initially lease these apartments, and you'll be asked if you want to remain on the waiting list. So if you intend to or want to stay on this waiting list after the lottery is run, you should just make sure, if you're moving or anything, that you contact the leasing office to update your contact information, email address or physical address, because that's how they'll be getting in touch with you. So yeah, you'll remain on the waiting list. There's a lot of units, but there's also a lot of interest in this lottery. So, there unfortunately will be, there'll be a lot of people screened throughout the process because, with 73 units, it doesn't mean there's going to be 73 people or even 100 people that are screened. There are going to be a lot of people that are screened to fill 73 apartments. So if you're not one of the first people on the waiting list, that certainly doesn't mean that you won't be contacted to move forward in this process. It does take quite a few screenings to get an apartment filled, typically. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, if you're interested, apply as soon as possible. We'll get the process started and apply for as many unit sizes as you are interested in. Once you get your lottery application into us, you'll be contacted if anything appears to be missing or incorrect, and you'll have a chance to correct it or resubmit it. Something that we see sometimes with these online applications, if you mistype something, you add an extra digit to your income, whatever it might be, you're going to get a notice saying you're not eligible, you're over income. If you think that the notice that you get from SCB Housing is not accurate, you thought your income was within the income range to qualify for this lottery, please reach out to us. We want to make sure that everyone who should be in the lottery drawing is in there. So have a look at what is sent to you after you submit the lottery application. And if you are denied at any point and don't agree with that, please let us know. If you're found eligible for the lottery, you're going to be sent that email that I mentioned. It's going to have your lottery application number. The lottery application number is in the form of a series of numbers. So if you were the very first person to complete and be approved for the Newton Crossing lottery, your number would have been A.001. That's just the number that's going to be drawn in the lottery. It's not meant to be a ranking of any sort at this point. It is an anonymous identifier so that your full name is not called during a lottery. The email that you get with your lottery application number is also going to confirm whether your household reported being a resident of Newton, or that a household member works full-time in the city of Newton, or if you have a child attending Newton Public Schools. So if you indicate that you have local preference for this lottery, you're going to need to confirm that by submitting a lease, or some other way to identify yourself as a Newton resident after the lottery. So just make sure that you're filling that out properly. You don't want to say you're a Newton resident and then that doesn't end up being the case after the fact, because you'll be forfeiting your position on the waiting list. The email that comes to you with the application number, if you are approved for this lottery, is also going to confirm the bedroom sizes that you applied for. So again, make sure you look at it. It's also going to confirm whether you needed a mobility accessible or hearing impairment accessible unit. So just make sure that all the information that you're seeing on that email is accurate. If any of it looks inaccurate, please let us know. So we want to make sure you're on the correct waiting list after the lottery is run. And then there'll also be a documentation requirements guide link in that email address, and that's provided to you as kind of a guide to give you more information on what items will need to be submitted after the lottery. If you're one of the households that's moving forward to submit your income, asset, and tax documentation to us. So it kind of lets you know how many pay stubs and what we might need from you so you can start to gather that information. And the lottery drawing itself, so that will take place on August 25th at 6 p.m. It will be very similar to this Zoom in that it will be a screen share. I'll be sharing the lottery drawing. It will be done on a computer instantaneously. You'll be able to see, the numbers drawn on a website called random.org. It just allows for, instantaneous randomization of the numbers rather than pulling them from a box as we had done in previous years. Keep in mind that you're not required to attend the lottery at all. The lottery results are going to be shared with everybody by the following morning, and the waiting lists will be sorted at that point. So sometimes, I don't want anybody to be coming to the lottery thinking they're going to know where they are in the waiting list that evening during the live lottery, because we first need to sort the results of the drawing onto the waiting list by those preferences that I mentioned. So we have to sort them by, in some cases, local preference for the local preference lists, by household size. If you applied for a 2-bedroom, but you're not a type 2 household, you're going to be further down the list and all of that. So sometimes you think, there's 73 apartments, there's going to be 73 numbers drawn. That's not the case here, though. So the purpose of these types of lotteries is to establish an order of the waiting list, like I mentioned. So in general, during the lottery, it's more beneficial if your number comes up early on the list, but it's likely not going to be the deciding factor of whether or not you'll be moving forward in the process to lease a apartment. Because, like I said, the couple examples. So if you're a type 1 household, you're drawn first in the lottery, you've applied for only a 2-bedroom apartment, you're still going to be behind all of the type 2 and type 3 households on that 2-bedroom waiting list. Also, there's going to be some households who were entered into the lottery that might be later found to be ineligible by the leasing office, or they may drop off because they're no longer interested in this apartment. So if your number is drawn later on in the process, you shouldn't lose hope at being able to move forward in the process, because you may still be contacted at a later date, like I mentioned. So when you're reviewing the waiting list that I will send after the actual lottery drawing, you're going to have a better understanding of where you fall and kind of whether or not you're going to be asked to move forward in the process right away, because they will be the sorted waiting list results. And if you're curious how the waiting lists are sorted, I just want to show you quickly on here. So this is the information packet. It's very long in terms of how the waiting lists are sorted for this particular lottery, just because there's the two 50% and 80% area median income units, and then there's just a lot of units. So it gets a little convoluted here, but these are the local preference waiting lists and how SEB will be sorting them, how the program requires that we sort them. And then the open waiting list means there is no local preference, and they're sorted in this way. So if you were to apply for a 2-bedroom apartment and you were someone who was applying for an 80%, you qualify for an 80% unit. If you were a type 2 or 3 household, you're going to have top priority on that waiting list. If you have local preference, I should say, you're going to have top priority here. If you apply for if you apply for 2 bedrooms and you qualify for 80%, let's look down here for the open waiting list. There is also an open waiting list for 80% 2 bedrooms. So you'd be on this waiting list as well. So if you applied for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, you're going to be on even more waiting lists. So when you apply to these apartments, make sure that when you get the waiting list emailed to you, you're looking for your lottery application number on several lists. Everybody will be on at least one waiting list. So just have a look at this. It's pages 11 and 12 in the information packet. If you have any questions on it, let us know. It's a little, especially for this lottery, there's a lot going on there because of all the units available. So like I said, when you get that lottery results email, you'll be finding your lottery application number. If your lottery application number is highlighted in green, that would mean that you're moving forward right away to apply for a lease with the leasing office. You're going to get in touch with the leasing office. They're going to determine whether or not you're eligible to lease with them. They're going to do their credit, rental history, background checks, that sort of thing. If you're found to be eligible, if you're the first person on a waiting list and you're found to be eligible to lease there, you're going to be referred back to SEB Housing to complete your program screening. So SEB Housing will then ask for your income, asset, and tax documentation. And you will have already reserved one of the apartments at that point, and you'll be submitting your information to us. It's a lot of information that needs to come into SEB Housing, so we work with everyone. You know, if you don't submit everything on the first try, you know, you missed some pay stubs or you didn't send all of your bank statements, that's fine. We'll just send you a incomplete notice, making sure you know what's pending, and we'll go from there. So just make sure you're staying on top of it and keeping in communication with the person you're working with at SEB Housing, but don't stress too much if you don't have everything ready to go on the first try to submit your completed application to us. So once SEB Housing approves your file, once we have everything we need to confirm that you're eligible for the affordable housing program, we're going to notify you, we're going to notify the leasing office, and you'll be able to sign the lease for the apartment that you had reserved. Once you are leased in an affordable apartment, you're done with screenings until your lease renewal date. So again, I'll give the example of if you sign a lease for September 2026, around this time, or maybe even earlier, maybe June of 2027, you would be doing a recertification with the leasing office. And at that point, you need to submit income information again. And that's true for every year that you're residing in a affordable apartment. If your income has increased over that first year of the lease, that's fine. Households remain eligible for leasing the affordable apartment at the affordable price as long as their household income doesn't exceed 140% of next year, for example's AMI. So there's a little wiggle room there. If you get a raise or anything like that, the program doesn't want to automatically make sure that everyone is then paying market rent. They want to still have an affordable opportunity for households who have incomes under 140% of AMI. So to give an example of that, these figures are in the information packet, but a household of two people would have qualified for an 80% AMI affordable unit for this lottery if your household income was at or below $109,700. That same family could make up to $153,580 at their time of recertification next year in order to remain eligible to rent the affordable apartment at the affordable rent. So again, just a little bit of breathing room there for households who may qualify now, but may have an income increase later on. Question here, when is the anticipated completion of the property? So my understanding is that, I don't know the exact completion date, but the units will be ready by the time the lottery is run. So there won't be a delay in leasing after the screenings. Question, if you're on the waiting list in the future and are offered a unit and decline the unit at that time, do you keep the place on the waiting list or you move to the bottom? You're removed from the waiting list if you decline the unit. So if the exception to that would be if you're on more than one waiting list. So if you applied for both a studio and a one bedroom and you denied the studio when the time came for your screening, that doesn't mean you're removed from the one bedroom waiting list though. But yeah, if you decline, you will just be removed from the waiting list. If you already applied, can you add another bedroom size? Yes. So you want to email, if you've already submitted an online application or a paper application, any kind of application for this lottery, the lottery application period is still open. So you're free to email info@sebhousing.com and we can change anything that you need changed. That goes for anyone who has already applied. Yep, question here, can you edit or change other fields in the application? Yes. So if you already submitted a application, you can't physically go in and, say, I need to add someone else, or I need to add another job or change my income, but we can. And that can be done up until the last day of the application period, which again is August 11th. So if you have any changes for us, please email info@sdbhousing.com. We can make those for you to make sure you're on the correct waiting list and all of that. What if you're a resident and work in the city? Do you just need to submit for one or the other? Right. So there's no, you don't have like higher priority if you both, work and live in Newton. But you would just indicate that you qualify for local preference. You don't have to identify why that is. Question here: does SCB review applications for both program eligibility and for sufficient credit, or does the owner do the credit rather than? That's correct. So the owner, the leasing office, the management team over at Newton Crossing will be doing the credit history check, the Corey check, rental history check, all of that. So anything that the leasing office is screening for market rate renters is going to be screening for them for anybody who's renting an affordable apartment. And then SCB Housing, we're doing the programmatic screening, and we're also doing the lottery screening, I guess. So when you submit your lottery application, we're going to be screening that. And then when the time comes to submit your income information, like pay stubs and everything, we'll be doing your program screening then to confirm your eligibility for the affordable housing program. Will we receive the recording for this info session later? It's going to be posted to our website. So after Zoom kind of like loads everything, it just takes a couple minutes that I will post this to, there'll be a link to the YouTube session, which this is going to turn into a YouTube session after the fact. So I'm not going to send it to everybody, but it will be on our website. If you go to sdbhousing.com and then go to the page specific for Newton Crossing, or you can just go to SDB Housing's YouTube channel. It'll be there later on tonight. That was pretty much all I wanted to get through from the information packet. Were there any questions on information that was covered or anything that wasn't mentioned that you had a question on? Anybody who hasn't applied yet, August 11th at 2 p.m. is the deadline. And again, as many unit sizes that you're interested in, please apply. Any questions that you have after this session that you maybe didn't think of, you can email us at info@sdbhousing.com, or you can give us a call. Is there a benefit for applying early? No, unfortunately, because even if you're given, a low, if maybe you were the first person to apply, everybody's lottery application number is going to be in the drawing altogether. So that's kind of the purpose of the lottery. Just doesn't matter if you're the last person to apply or the first person to apply. Everybody's going to have kind of that equal playing field when the lottery is run.
Hello, can you hear me? I have a question about the assets.
Sure.
Some assets are highly liquid, like say an ABLE account, because they could be used for housing expenses. And then other ones, like say a CD that matures in a year, 2 years. So how do you guys handle that? I'm like, you said that the assets were mostly considered about getting up to the minimum income, but could you get pushed over the maximum or by the liquidity of these different types of assets? So
the income limits are what SCB Housing is looking at. So there's no asset limit for this opportunity. The leasing office, when they're determining your lease eligibility, if you have enough, funds to afford the affordable rent, they'll be looking at what, I don't know what their criteria is in terms of like what types of assets might be more favorable to them or the balances or anything like that. But in terms of, I can speak more to the income limit. If you have a lot of interest being earned in assets, it almost never disqualifies anybody because most people are not earning, thousands of dollars in interest on assets that are being counted, because it's only the interest that would be added to your total household income in terms of the income limit, if that makes sense. So if you have $100,000 in assets, but they're not earning much interest, it's not going to be doing much for, being added to your total household income.
Yeah, no, I was more of the, let's say you have like a $36,000 of income, but you have $100,000 in liquid assets.
Mm-hmm.
Would that would that work, or is that
I see
so?
what you mean. So it's the minimum income threshold there is going to be up to the leasing office, and I don't know what they would normally, when they're looking at assets, I just don't know. Like it varies depending on the different management companies, I'm sure. So it'll be up to them as to whether or not they feel that individual households or applicants have sufficient amount. They might just ask you some more questions too. They might just ask questions about how how feasible it is for you to use that money towards rent every month and that sort of thing.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I think there's a couple other here. Will we be invited to the lottery or hear back after the fact? So the lottery information is in the information packet. So in terms of how to join it and everything, let me get that up again. So in the information packet and on the ad and everything that you might have seen, it has the lottery info here. So it's going to be August 25th at 6 p.m. There's the Zoom link there. You can attend it, like I said, but you're not going to know during the actual drawing where you fall in the waiting list. You're going to know later on that night or maybe the next morning, depending on how long it takes to sort the results. But you definitely will have that information the next day in your email inbox with the attached sorted results that have been put onto the waiting list. What forms of public transportation are nearby? Sorry, this is cutting off for me. Is it only commuter rail, which is not accessible to those with disabilities? So the West Newton stop is nearby. Like you said, that's commuter rail. I believe all of the commuter rail stations are accessible now, but if that isn't the case, I am mistaken. There is the Green Line somewhere in Newton. I don't know how far it is from this specific property. I would assume there's also a bus line, but I don't have the specifics of it. The leasing office would definitely have that information further down the line, though. Anyone else? Okay, yeah, just for anybody listening, some of the commuter rail stops are still being renovated to be ADA accessible in the next few years. There are bus routes at some areas. Another question here, do the units have washer dryers in the units? Yes. Is there central air and heat? Yes. And where can we access information on the unit? So their website doesn't have a whole lot of information, the property website, in terms of, floor plans and things like that. But if there's specific info you're looking for, please email info@scbhousing.com, meaning specific things about amenities or features of the units or anything, because I should be able to get that information from the leasing office for anyone who is looking for, like I said, floor plan or, specific amenity type info. Yep. Question here, when can we see the floor plans? Please email info@scbhousing.com and I can send either what we have or what I'm able to get from the leasing office over to anyone who's interested. There is elevator access. Yes, that's property. So anyone who's driving, there is a there is a parking spot included, like I said, with the rent. And like I said, if you're watching this after the fact, please email us at info@scbhousing.com if something wasn't covered that you are hoping to find out. And if there's any other questions, I'll just give it another minute here. And we look forward to getting your application. You know, again, the application deadline is August 11th at 2. And any questions in the meantime, please contact SCB Housing. And if we don't have the information, we'll reach out to the leasing office and the management team over there to be able to get that specific info from you. Question here, if we have questions too complicated for this chat, can we make an appointment to talk with someone at SCB? Yep, you can by all means reach out to us either by email or by contacting us. And we have an administrative team who's able to field questions. All right, thanks everybody for your questions, your attendance, and your interest in the property. And, oh, question here, how many accessible units? Sorry that wasn't on here, but it is in the information packet. So I'm going to go up to page 3 in the information packet. There are 6 mobility impairment units. There's 3 1-bedrooms, 2 2-bedrooms, and 1, that's a typo, one 3-bedroom. There are 2 units which have features for hearing impairments, and that's 1 1-bedroom and 1 2-bedroom. I don't have the breakdown as to whether or not they're the 50% units or the 80% units, unfortunately. But that is the breakdown here. So there are 8 total accessible units, 6 that are have mobility features, and 2 that have hearing impairment features. So yeah, the info packet also is on our website. It's a PDF that is where you can find the application and everything as well. So you'll see that packet there. It's about 15 pages or so. All right, and again, please reach out, info@scbhousing.com if you have any questions that weren't answered, or if you had any other questions for us. That's our main phone number as well, and someone will be able to get back to you. Thanks again, everybody, and I hope you have a good night. We look forward to hearing from you.